Hello Darwins and Siamese twins, my name is Joseph Moore and today I'm taking on one of the greatest debates in the last 150 years or so, which is evolution! Now firstly, I'd like to define evolution. Evolution is the theory of how all species have diversified and multiplied all over the earth over the time of its history since the very beginning of life. Evolution does not, however, define how life was first created. So those of you who there believe that maybe life was first created by a flying cloud man, evolution doesn't infringe on that. It's everything that after the first life that evolution takes care of. One thing you should know about evolution is that in nature it takes an incredibly long time to see any real substantial change within a complex species. That is on the magnitude of tens of thousands of years. Say you had a time machine and you decided to go back as far as the Neolithic Revolution. That's 10,000 years ago. If you see humans milling around, they still look exactly like humans. Maybe their skin's a little darker than mine right now, but they're still human. You can still mate with them and produce fertile offspring, okay? Even if you go back another 10,000 years or another 10,000 years, you'll still have the same species. Which brings me to the point that populations evolve, not species. Each individual species is the same as its parents. It is only after a huge amount of time, eons of time, that there is any difference between species. That is why evolution is so hard to prove. But before I go on to that, you should know that there's one last thing you should know about evolution, and that species really only change if there's a stress on their environment. So a species will very quickly change to find its own place in the new environment that it finds itself in. But after that, if the environment doesn't change any, the species can remain the same for a million years, like with crocodiles. There are fossil records of crocodiles that look very exactly the same as they are right now, except bigger. Okay, so I'd like to take the remaining time to clear up some misconceptions about evolution. Okay, so scientists have shown evidence of microevolution, but they still have yet to prove evolution on a large scale. They haven't shown that a species could become an entirely different species yet. That is where you're wrong. The only difference between microevolution and macroevolution is an issue of scale. Evolution is a pretty new theory. It's only been around for, say, 150 years. And for only the past 50 years or so do we have any knowledge of DNA or its structure or modern genetics, and in that, only in the past 25 years do we even know how to analyze DNA. So in that time it'd be very hard to create an experiment that would measure the change in a species over time, right? Well, as luck would have it, scientists have actually already done that. There's a continuing experiment on E. coli where they've taken 12 populations of E. coli, separated them, and subjected them to different environments. As it turns out, after 50,000 generations, these new E. coli are very different from each other. From wild E. coli, these lab-grown E. coli are much bigger and much more able to process glucose. One of the populations which was subject to a high concentration of citric acid was actually able to use citric acid as an energy source after long enough time. This test has been going on since I think '89, so 23 years, and there's been a large difference between these lab E. coli and the wild ones. So who knows, in maybe another 25 years or so, these species will be so different that they'll be scientifically different species than wild E. coli. So if this experiment does not prove that over time one species can turn into another species, then I don't know what does. Everything in evolution is transitory, so how would complex organs be possible? What's the point of having half an eye or half a wing? Well, to that I argue that half an eye is much more useful than having no eye at all. If you could notice a difference between night and day, then you could organize a schedule around that. And more impressively, if you could see maybe a blur from one direction, then you might know to avoid that because that thing might be coming to eat you. So as you can see, having a half an eye or very limited vision would be much more beneficial to having no vision at all. As for having half a wing, that's not very hard to counteract either. For that, I go to the flying squirrel. The flying squirrel cannot fly, oddly enough, but what it can do is glide, which means that it takes a much longer time for it to reach the ground. In an environment with lots of trees, taking a longer time to reach the ground would mean that you hit it with less force, and that might result in the difference between life and death. So being able to slow your descent would be very useful indeed, and over time that might eventually grow into the ability to fly. Thank you all for listening in so far to where so many people refuse to even open their ears to. I humbly thank you, and well, bye.